Hey everyone, I'm Hans from Render. Welcome back. Today we're continuing our guide on how to determine settings for new materials on the Optic. And today we'll be tackling engraving settings. Many of the steps are the same from the previous video on cut settings, so make sure you watch that one as well, as I won't repeat every detail to keep this video short and concise. Let's dive right in. First, we'll be using the same red mapboard material as we did for determining cut settings, for two reasons. First, that'll allow us to combine cutting and engraving for our demo project at the end. And second, mapboard has a special property that makes it great for engraving that you might already know if you're familiar with it. That is, it's a two-layer material with a colored top layer and a white base layer. Combined with the abilities of a laser, you can make some pretty neat designs utilizing this two-layer property. Now looking at Lightburn, let's get right into determining our engraving settings. Just like last time, we'll start by looking at a similar material in the Optic starter library and using the engraving settings we find there as our starting point. I'll look at chipboard again this time, since its cut settings last time were a good baseline for the same material. Selecting the raster fill option and looking at the settings, I can see that the engraving settings for chipboard are 175 millimeters per second and 100% power, with a 0.07 millimeter step over. I won't use quite that fine of a step over today, instead using 0.1 millimeters, but regardless I can use these speed and power settings as my baseline. That being said, step over and overscan settings don't really play a significant role in the results we're looking at today, but let us know if you'd be interested in a more in-depth look at these options. Let's now open up our material test window. And the first step is to change our baseline material settings to fill mode, here, and 0.1 millimeter step over and 5% overscan with bidirectional fill turned on. Bidirectional fill just means that the laser will fire while traveling in either direction while scanning back and forth, rather than just one direction, which speeds things up quite a bit when engraving. Now looking at the parameters we'll use, we'll generally be working with speed and power when it comes to engraving. And based on the reference of chipboard that we looked at, I'll go ahead and set our ranges to a minimum of 50 millimeters a second and a maximum of 200 for speed. And then we'll start at 50% for power and going up to 100%. Again, the goal is to overshoot and undershoot things by a bit to get the most information from our test pattern results. Let's go ahead and save this as a preset so that we won't lose our settings when we close out this window. Then we can go ahead and grab our material and get things lined up on the Optic. Alright, let's put our material down on the cutting mat, aligning it with the bottom left-hand corner of the grid, and then we'll home the machine and make sure we're set to start from current position. Then we'll go ahead and open up the material test window again and select our preset. I already know my material is a bit too small for this test pattern, so I'll go ahead and drop down the height and width to 4 by 4 millimeters. Then I'll hit frame to confirm it fits on my material, which it does. It's always good to check this to make sure your test pattern doesn't end up having to be redone because it went beyond your material. I've already focused the laser to engraving height, so let's hit start and watch it engrave all 100 of our settings combinations. This will take a few minutes, so we'll speed things up for you. Alright, now that our test pattern is done, let's take a look at the results, and things look pretty good. This is a pretty great result. We've got a wide range of different darknesses and lightnesses and depths of engraving as well. Maybe difficult to see, but there's actually kind of a 3D effect going on here, which is really quite nice. Now, looking at this, we definitely have a lot of options to pick from. We could pick any one of these along this kind of axis here and get very similar results. But I think that what I really want is relatively high speed, and that means as well getting 100% power usage. So if I look over here at the column for 100% power, I can see that I like right around 100 millimeters a second and 100% power. That looks pretty good. We've got some good depth there. We're fully engraving away the top layer. Looks pretty nice, but we're also not charring it too much. like you see over here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pick 100 millimeters a second and 100% power as our engraving settings. Now that we've got our settings for engraving figured out, let's see them in action with our demo project. Just like last time, we'll bring in our artwork to Lightburn from an Illustrator file, but this time we have an additional layer to work with, which we'll be engraving using our new settings. The first step is to assign our cut settings from last time to the layer we want to cut, which we can do by simply selecting the layer and then going to our vector cut entry in the material library for Mapboard and selecting Assign. That'll apply the settings to the layer. Now moving on to our focus, which is the engraving, we'll select a layer we want to engrave and select the Fill option and then enter a 0.1 millimeter step over and our settings, which are 100 millimeters a second and 100% power. Of course, we'll open up that larger window to make sure there are no other settings we want to change. That all looks good. And so we can go ahead and put our artwork where we want it in Lightburn. This time, I'll move it over a little bit so I can cut our design from the same piece of material we used for our cut settings demo. This makes things super easy as I can just line it up to the same spot as before and I don't have to waste any of my material. Placing it just there. I'll go ahead and get our material lined up on the cutting mat. Then I'll home the machine and make sure we're set to start from absolute coordinates. Then of course I can frame to confirm my material and artwork position. That all looks good and we're ready to start. Alright, now that that's all done and I've cleared out the scrap material, let's take a look at the results. I'm really quite happy with this. I really love the 3D effect and, comparing it to the previous version, it really enhances the design. Seeing this really just gives me a whole bunch of ideas of ways that we can use this really cool two-layer material for great effect in lots of different projects. Let's go ahead and add these engraving settings to our material library in Lightburn, alongside our cut settings for the same material. We can do this by selecting our engraving layer, then going to the Library tab and selecting Create New from Layer. We'll enter in our information, Mapboard 1.4 millimeters, and our description as Raster Engrave. We'll hit OK, and then these settings will be saved right there next to the other settings, ready to use for our future projects. So, that's how you determine the best engraving settings for any material. Just like cut settings, all it takes is running a test pattern and carefully analyzing the results to achieve solid engravings every time. In the future, we plan on covering how to determine picture engraving settings, and of course, lots of other topics. If you have any questions or thoughts for us, leave a comment below or contact us directly at hello@render.com. If there's anything specific you'd like to see us cover in a future video, just let us know and we'll see what we can do. Thanks for watching, and have fun with the Optic.